Here's Fred Childers with This Week in Louisiana Politics.
Good morning, I'm Fred Childers. Thanks for watching This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. There is one less candidate running for Louisiana governor. Now, State Representative Richard Nelson announced this week he is dropping out of the race and throwing his support behind Attorney General Jeff Landry. Since Nelson opted to run for governor, he cannot seek re-election in the state legislature next month. According to the Secretary of State's office, Nelson will still remain on the ballot for the October 14th election. Any votes he gets will still be counted. And we are just a few weeks away from the primary election, and now with two debates under their belts, pollsters are waiting for the numbers to change for those running for governor. Part of the reason could be low voter turnout. Capitol reporter Shannon Hecht brings us insights into what politicos are seeing.
On the one hand, we're all waiting for big things to happen and big breakthroughs and big things to cut loose, but they don't seem to be happening.
The days before Louisianians cast their ballots for the next governor are running out. Pollsters like Ron Fauché say that they've seen Attorney General Jeff Landry with a comfortable lead for months, with other candidates struggling to skim off his support.
Most of the candidate campaigns have failed to do what they wanted to do. I think their messaging has been off.
Fauché says that governor's races of the past have had a lot more give and take in the numbers leading up to Election Day. But he's run into people not being as interested this year, and they're already looking towards the presidential.
And seems to be following more of a national model.
Fauché says that Landry sealing up the LA GOP and Trump endorsement early set him as the main Republican candidate for a lot of voters that lean farther right.
So a candidate who can attract 30%, 35%, we had Landry at 36%. You know, what you'd think of as the hard mega base in Louisiana.
Sean Wilson also benefits from the state party support, but Fauché's poll shows that he needs more name recognition.
So Wilson gets 60% of the vote among Democrats, but only 35% of Democrats had ever heard of him.
He says there is still time for the other candidates to get a second wind and bump up in the polls. Election Day is October 14th. For your local election headquarters, I'm Shannon Hecht.
Senator John Kennedy may not be running this election cycle, but he is throwing his weight behind some of the down-ballot races. This week, Kennedy endorsed Liz Morrell for Attorney General. Morrell is Jeff Landry's right-hand woman, currently in the AG's office. Kennedy also endorsed Larry Freeman, a former state representative running to be a judge. Also picking up endorsements this week, Jeff Landry was endorsed by Congressman Steve Scalise. Scalise is the second highest ranking House member in Congress as the majority leader. Back here at home, Stephen Waguespack picked up an endorsement from the Advocate Times-Picayune editorial board. The editorial board does not represent the journalist reporting staff. New lawsuits have been filed to stop the hearings for 56 death row inmates looking for clemency in the waning days of the governor's administration. District attorneys from across the state and victims' families made pleas to the pardon board this week. Shannon Hecht is back with those details.
District attorneys are arguing that the clemency hearings scheduled for most of Louisiana's death row inmates have been rushed and have violated the rules of the process.
Those 56 cases leapfrogged over 440 pending clemency cases. And that's not right.
Attorney General Jeff Landry filed a new lawsuit in order to stop the hearings, saying the process has not been transparent and that it's a political move by the governor. Bill Quigley, a law professor at Loyola University, says that while it is extraordinary that all these cases are coming at once, it is a process that has been in the state constitution for decades.
If there are special circumstances, intellectual disability, misconduct by anybody in the legal system, these are the ways that we try to correct the system.
Clemency for these inmates, if approved by both the Board of Pardons and the governor, would change their sentences to life in prison. But some district attorneys believe that some inmates won't stop at clemency.
They're not giving up their appeals. They're not saying that we're guilty and we'll take life and we're going to go on. They're saying, I'm still going to continue to fight you.
Quigley says everyone has a right to feel safe and believes the victims will still be if the inmates are taken off death row. The District Attorneys Association gathered family members of victims of some of the people on death row for a press conference to share their fears about the process.
We want death row nothing less.
The first clemency hearings are slated for October, and the injunction hearing on if they'll move forward is later this month. In Baton Rouge, I'm Shannon Hecht.
We'll be watching those hearings. A new task force at the state capitol will look for ways to tackle violent crime in Louisiana. Now, it was created through a controversial legislation during the legislative session this spring. It suggested the uptick in crime could have been tied to criminal justice reforms from 5 years ago. Some conservatives are looking to overturn some of the previous reforms with a potential Republican governor, but advocates strongly came out against that idea. Now the task force will study the data and make recommendations for lawmakers.
We can all recognize that we have a problem. I think that this task force has been put together very carefully with some great people who each bring to this task force a unique perspective of our criminal justice system.
The task force is a bipartisan group made up of state agencies, lawmakers, and advocacy groups. Moving forward, they will review data on crime, recidivism, and how recent laws may have impacted that. With record low water levels in the Mississippi River, there is a risk of salt water getting into the drinking water. Some steps are being taken now to head off the issue. Rick Gogreve reports.
Efforts are being made to slow down the saltwater wedge making its way up the Mississippi River, but it seems at this point it's inevitable that the intrusion makes its way to New Orleans, possibly contaminating water systems and affecting our daily lives.
At a certain limit, it's unhealthy to drink, obviously. And so also for the land, you know, it could be a problem for freshwater plants and aquatic species, but we're mostly concerned about the freshwater supply.
The Sewerage and Water Board says while the water supply is currently clean, they are preparing for possible impacts, something many local businesses are also doing. Canseco Market employees say they're already looking for ways to work around the potential issues.
I think we're going to have a lot of problems with the deli, especially if it's a lot of salt water. I think we're definitely going to have to figure out what we're going to do with that, probably use a bunch of bottled water when we cook instead of using that. And
with demand for bottled water expected to shoot up, Canseco's is also preparing for a possible rush.
We get 3 trucks a week now, so we're going to be just stocking up extra on all 3 of the trucks every week and just having as much backpiled as we can and just see how much we need to be putting out every day. We're probably going to have to put like pallets out of that. Yeah, like out on the floor. If it's not out, we got to get more, you know.
While there is still time to prepare, the clock is now ticking for local residents and businesses.
A little worried for sure, especially with the holidays coming up, because not only do we have to deal with that, but now we have to deal with the water possibly being contaminated with a bunch of salt water. And so that's going to be a big issue for us.
That was Rick Gogreve reporting. The threat of a salt mine collapse has prompted Governor John Bel Edwards to issue an emergency declaration. State officials are concerned over the salt cavern on the western side of the Sulphur Mines Salt Dome in Calcasieu Parish. There are no imminent signs of collapse, but scientists have noticed what they call early warning signs. The declaration just allows the state to expedite the process of bringing experts and resources in sooner rather than later. Edwards said this will allow them to map out the best response to ensure safety for everyone. More potential insurance problems as Louisiana residents could see higher premiums. This time it hinges on the sale of Blue Cross Blue Shield. Stay with us.